I call to order the Waverly City Council for October 23rd, 2017. Is there a motion to approve the agenda as distributed by our city clerk, Carla Geyer?
I'd like to move a change to the agenda, please. I'd like to move Leisure Services Commission update D, number 2, to November 6th, I believe it is. Staff has reported that the person making the report is going to have difficulty getting here.
Okay, is that the motion? Is there a second?
Second.
Motion is second. All in favor signify with yes.
Yes?
Yes.
We have an adjusted agenda. Would someone like to move the amended agenda?
You move the agenda, amended agenda.
Is there a second?
Second.
Council discussion? All in favor signify with yes.
Yes.
Opposed with no. Becomes our agenda for the evening. We welcome back Dietrich Drenko as our guest council person for the month of October. Now, this is number 3. Dietrich, you're a veteran. Any lead-in words from our wise council person?
Nothing much. It just looks like we've got a lot of exciting stuff on the agenda today.
Yes, full tonight. Thank you. I'd welcome any comments by the public on any items that are not on tonight's agenda. Hearing none, we move to study session calendar item number 1, which is the Southeast Waverly Flood Protection Feasibility Study update for 2017. We have engineering night, and with 3 sets of engineers, ACOM, I think, and WHKS McClure on this first one, which brings our engineer to the front of the mic. Mike?
You know, this is going to be the best council meeting of the month, right? So, I think we have more engineers than pastors.
This is a rare night, folks.
Well, we're starting out tonight with the Southeast Waverly Flood Protection Feasibility Study update. This was a study that was originally done in 2011, and we've updated it with some new aerials and the new Cedar River floodplain mapping that was done. And we've got Dan Kimball and Larry Wheely from AECom here. And from what I understand is Dan's going to present, and if he gets stuck, then Larry's going to hop right up and help fill in the gaps. So I'm going to turn it over to Dan.
Thanks, Mike. As Mike kind of mentioned, in 2011, we kind of did a flood study, a feasibility study for looking at flood protection at the Southeast Waverly area. Within that study, we looked at 3 possible options, with kind of the first option being the more robust of the options. That was looking at 4 feet of freeboard over the current base flood elevation, which is the 100-year flood elevation for the southeast area. Option 2 was looking at a little bit less robust, so 2 feet of freeboard over that area. And then a third option, which would be building the protection elevation to that 100-year elevation that we currently have. So what I'm going to do is go over the updates that we did to that original study, including updated cost estimates for the 2017 year, bringing the 2011 updated costs. We also looked at kind of a new study looking at access during smaller flood events. So I'd say more frequent flood events. It's typical 50-year and less flood events at the 7th Avenue Southeast and 4th Street Southeast to kind of access the high area there south of the river. That's kind of split by 3rd Street Southeast as you come across the river there on the bridge. So as Mike had said, we took the original study and we updated that with the new floodplain mapping that was created based on the Dry Run Creek improvements that have been completed over the last couple of years, as well as the Cedar River Dam Along with that Cedar River Dam, there was some updated mapping done based on topography downstream of the dam, which removed some areas from the floodplain and just kind of updated the floodplain based on the current layout of the land. So we wanted to update those figures, and that's what I'll discuss today. As well as updating those figures, as I mentioned, we put together a preliminary design for looking at keeping access during these smaller flood events either through 7th Avenue Southeast or 4th Street Southeast. And what we did is we gathered some information through a preliminary survey to get the kind of the existing elevations out there and kind of reviewed those on the based on the new flood mapping to see what options we would have potential road construction in that area. So just a refresher, I guess, to kind of go over, the Cedar River mapping changed based off the dam improvements and kind of the Dry Run Creek improvements. And with those improvements, we also reviewed kind of the protection levels that we had designed for in the 2011 study. The dam improvements were basically for upstream improvements. They didn't really affect the downstream flood elevations on the Cedar River. So what we had originally intended in 2011 protection levels, those are still current today. They match the current flood elevation levels that are out there, even though the mapping has been updated a little bit in that area based on topography. The current flood elevations, the current alignments that were in that 2011 study are the same as they were then as they are today. We're looking at the same typical sections, which are earthen levees, either a flood wall or a combined earthen levee flood wall, where we have limiting right-of-way in areas like that. Just to kind of go over again, we had the 3 protection levels that we looked at, which is the 4-foot of freeboard over the 100-year, the 2-foot of freeboard, and then option 3, which is essentially no freeboard over the 100-year elevation. This is kind of an outline of the floodplain mapping from the 2011 study prior to the Cedar River updated floodplain mapping and the Dry Run Creek mapping. If you look just strictly at the colors, the purple in this area is kind of the 100-year floodplain back in 2011. And that has currently been updated with all the dam improvements and the Dry Run Creek improvements. So what we did is we updated that map, and you can see as we jump to this level, that purple area shrinks down quite a bit. So with the improvements that Waverly has done along Dry Run Creek and the Cedar River, the 100-year floodplain for the Cedar River is significantly smaller than it was on the original mapped floodplains. And what we're going to focus on later in the presentation are kind of the 2 yellow areas you can see in the southeast of the south of the river there, kind of split off by 3rd Street Southeast. This is option 1 with the highest footprint with the 4-foot option freeboard. You can see the protection levels. There's different sections that we discussed in a 2011 report. Option 2 is like I said, the background mapping, the aerial, the floodplain. That's all gonna remain the same. Our footprint for our protection level is going to be reduced because we're 2 foot lower in those areas. So if we have a typical levee section, as you go down, you decrease the elevation by 2 feet. You're not going to be as wide at the bottom, so you're going to have less impacts to right-of-way. But you're also reducing the level of protection from 4 feet to 2 feet of freeboard. And then this is option 3 again, similar background, just less of a impact because we're another 2 feet lower than option 2. So as part of the update, we also looked at bringing the cost from 2011 to 2017 dollars. And if we look at that, the comparison, on average, it was about a 40 to 50% increase from 2011 to 2017. This is just based on average prices that contractors have been bidding projects for since then. Personal experience for those projects. So it's a significant increase from 2011 to 2017. Just to kind of run through it, we're looking at option one, which is the more robust option, is around $14 million, the planning level cost estimate for that flood protection option, which, we go down to option three, we're looking at about $6.5 million. But again, that's a lot less protection than we're looking at for that option. So those are kind of the updates that we completed on the 2011 study. As Mike had said, it's mainly dealing with the new floodplain mapping that the city has worked on between the projects in the area, as well as aerial mapping and then the new cost estimates. One of the other options we looked at is the potential during these flooding events. We talked to the city, and the city has made it aware that some of these areas have a hard time accessing their properties during not necessarily the 100-year flood event, but even some of the smaller events, say a 10-year flood event or up to a 50-year flood event. And a lot of these access points are 7th Avenue and Southeast and 4th Street Southeast. So we looked at a preliminary design in those areas to see what we could do to provide access for these smaller flood events. As I mentioned, we're looking at, a 50-year and less flood event. We're not necessarily looking at a 100-year flood event because that's a lot harder to access, and some of these areas are inundated during those events. The design is just based on existing profiles, a review of the FEMA floodplain mapping. The goal is to provide access for these smaller events and not leave any of the community cut off during those events. This is kind of a layout of what we're looking at. I guess you could say in the northwest portion of the area is kind of where 7th Avenue Southeast is. And we'd be looking at raising that roadway. Currently, the sump area, the low area of that roadway is around 904. We'd be looking at raising that up to around 906.5, which would be about a 2.5 feet rise. And by doing this, it would allow access for some of these smaller events. We'd also be looking at providing an area where if we got even an event that the water surface is gonna be above this 906.5, we could add a couple feet of sandbags north of the 7th Avenue Southeast intersection to even increase the amount of time that we'd have to access that for larger events, up to approximately a 50-year event. Now, we're also looking at raising a preliminary design of raising 4th Street Southeast as well. Now, in this area, the flood elevation is approximately 2 feet lower during an event than it is in the 7th Street area. But we're still looking at raising this about the same elevation. We just wouldn't require the sandbagging down in that area. These are some recent floods, and then kind of the 50-year elevations to kind of. If you look at the 50-year at top, the 50-year flow based on the FIS is around 34,000 cubic feet per second. And that equates to about roughly elevation of 908.1 at the 7th Avenue Southwest intersection kind of roadway there, the low point of the roadway. September 2016 flood and May 2013 floods, recent crest, were around 907 about that intersection. So, that would have been roughly 3 foot underwater at the low point of that roadway now, cutting off access to the higher areas near 3rd Street and between 6th Avenue Southwest and 7th Avenue Southwest. And then you look at even like August 1993 flood, that was around 908. And then in April 93, that was around 906.1. So all of these events of the recent crests, there would have been 2+ feet of water in that low area of 7th Avenue Southwest access during those events. This is just more of a graphical representation of those events. So this is it's elevation 907, based on the Cedar River flooding, based on kind of the contours of the area and LiDAR mapping. You can see in the blue area there up at 7th Avenue Southwest, where it's overtopping the roadway there for the elevation 907. With our improvements, we'd be looking at raising that roadway to 906.5, but also allowing an area for sandbagging. So if it goes above that 906.5, we could, put a couple feet of sandbags up there to still provide access to this high areas that you can see that are outside of the blue shaded area. This is an even higher flood, which is similar, approximately a 50-year flood. You can see that it's just a little bit wider of a footprint where we have impacts from the Cedar River during the flood. But with the improvements that we're looking at, we'd be able to still access those areas during this event. This is just a follow-up of a smaller event where actually sandbagging, if we went with the 906.5, we wouldn't necessarily need to have sandbags out there, and we'd still be able to access those areas during the smaller flooding events. This is kind of the preliminary layout that we'd be looking at doing for the 7th Avenue area. We'd be looking at replacing about 600 feet of the paving to eliminate that low spot, that sump that's there now, and move that down closer to the First Street Southwest intersection. By doing this, we'd have a constant grade, so we'd put a couple new storm sewer intakes in. We'd have some rebuilding of the sidewalk on the south side of the road, as well as kind of a gate wall structure that we could close during these flood events to still provide access for these for road access to these properties. 4th Street would be a similar design. However, it's a steeper grade going in and out of the low point of 4th Street, so we would have less roadway to reconstruct in this area, just over 300 feet of roadway, and we'd still be looking at some additional storm sewer improvements as well as gatewell in this area. Another option we added to this area as well would be looking at connecting the 10-foot trail that is just south of the school to the existing roadway. Now we'll kind of look at the costs associated with each of these options. As I mentioned, 7th Avenue was approximately 600 feet of roadway. We'd be looking at about 330 feet of storm sewer, a couple storm sewer structures, raising the roadway, so you got some earthwork construction in there, removal. Would be around $420,000 is our planning level cost estimate for that 600 feet of roadway and storm sewer improvements. And then 4th Street Southeast, like I said, we're about half the amount of roadway reconstruction, a little over 300 feet, 330 feet. We'd still have some storm sewer and about 280 feet of the recreational trail. Our planning level cost estimate for that option is around $250,000. So at this time, I'd like to open it up for any questions regarding the update to the flood study, as well as a review of preliminary design for access during these smaller flood events.
So if you close off 7th Avenue, that's flowing water during a flood event, correct?
Yes, during a flood event, it's outside of the floodway, so it's not the floodway flowing water. It's in the floodplain, but water always finds kind of the low spot, so there is some flow that would come across that area.
Right. So that flow goes across 7th Avenue.
Yes.
Yeah, if you block that off effectively to protect that downstream, what is that going to do to your level on the main part of the river?
Preliminary analysis. Now, when we go into final design, we would do some more detailed modeling of this. But given that it's outside of the floodway, which is kind of the reserved area that no fill is supposed to take place in the floodway, we're in the floodplain here. There should be minimal, if any, impacts to the upstream elevations. especially in the 100-year event, because during what we're looking at is protecting up to like a 50-year event. So during a 100-year event, there's still going to be flow going over that roadway. That flow is still going to be there. But since this fill that we're looking at is just confined kind of the roadway and in the floodplain area, not the floodway, the floodplain area is not the effective flow area per se, especially with the fill that's downstream of that area.
Mike, with your experience seeing the water flowing across, do you concur with that, or? I mean,
Yeah, as Dan indicated, that when water does go over 7th Avenue, it's only a couple feet deep, while in the Cedar River, it may be 20 feet deep. So it's not insignificant, but it doesn't have a substantial impact. And the way the FEMA flood maps are drawn, they talk about the flowway and then the flowway and the flood fringe. And the way they're drawn is you can take that entire flood fringe and squeeze it in, and the expected rise is to be less than 1 foot.
less than 1 foot.
Right.
So you take that into consideration with your design of your.
Right. So now, we're not saying it's going to be a foot. It's probably significantly less. And that's what, unfortunately, there's no cross-section in the floodplain modeling at that exact location. So what Dan has indicated is they'd have to go in and they'd have to add additional cross-sections, and that's somewhat involved.
Yeah, so what he's saying, before final design, we would actually go in there and model this to see what impacts they would have. The expected impacts are minimal. Yeah, so if you look at this area, the greenish kind of area, that's the floodway. So it's pretty well confined to the river. The purple is the floodplain, which is a fairly substantial area. And the way Mike was explaining with the floodway, the way those are designed is that's supposed to pass, if everything in the floodplain, let's say, was filled up. So there was no ponding outside of that floodway area. It was all filled up. That floodway is large enough to handle the flood flows for the 100-year event, with only increasing that in that area by 0.9 feet. So what we're looking at doing is, fairly minuscule as far as the confined to the roadway, raising the roadway 2.5 feet. We're 35 feet wide, raising it roughly 2.5 feet at the lowest point of the roadway. So we're not filling a very large area. But we would take that fill into account and look at that during a final design to see what impacts that would have, if any. But just with the preliminary analysis and experience with other projects of this type, I don't expect. I expect very minimal impact. Another point would be, if you can look at the figure, it's kind of in an ineffective flow area for the major flood flows, because the big yellow area, that's a hill there, so that kind of blocks off a lot of the flow, which causes the majority of the flow to go down the Cedar River channel. But as Mike has said, there is some flow that comes through that area during flood events.
I guess I've seen that go across 7th Avenue. I guess I wouldn't term it as minimal, I guess, in my opinion. But in the whole scheme of things, it probably is.
Mm-hmm. And like I said, we could also do an analysis to see how much flow is actually flowing in that area compared to the Cedar River, and get a comparison that way as well.
After you've raised 7th Avenue.
Yeah, but keep in mind, during the 100-year flood event, the base flood elevation, there's still going to be flow going over 7th Avenue, because we're not raising the road up that much, so that flow is still going to get over there. It's just not going to get over there for the smaller events.
And I think it was after 93 flooding, they raised 4th Street, put some culverts under it, those type of things, and then we had another event, and it was felt that hindered water flow, those type of things. Are we raising 4th Street back to that level, or would it be less than that, or?
Yeah, and we're not advocating that. We were looking at if we're looking at providing protection for smaller events, we can prevent the flow from going across 7th Avenue, but it's still going to back in from the south east, down by Southeast Elementary School. And there are a few homes that are impacted from that. Our Harlington Place cul-de-sac is one area where the homes are most likely to be impacted. And so, again, if we can prevent the water from even backing into Crestwood Park by raising 4th Street, they would be protected. But we know that there's concern over at the point water would overtop, like a 1999 100-year flood or a 500-year flood 2008. There's concern that any elevation change to 4th Street would impede the flow of water and back it up and maybe cause concern. So our primary objective with this is looking at 7th Avenue. Now, rivers flow downstream, and so from near South Riverside Park, the elevation of the river drops 2 feet by the time it gets to the main lift station or by past Southeast Elementary School. So if you keep the water from going over 7th Avenue, the only way for it to get into Crestwood Park is for it to backflow. So it'll backflow all the way to 7th Avenue, but it will always be 2 feet lower than the water on the north side of the road. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. I want to switch gears a little bit and show you some photographic evidence from the various floods that we had. So let's see. So April of 1993, north is to the left, and you can see the water did not cross 1st Street. Here is 7th Avenue, and the water has overtopped it. So the raising of 7th Avenue in this location would mean that the southeast part of town would be accessible both from the north of 7th Avenue and south of 7th Avenue. The Iowa Flood Center mapping that we have, we can play around with the flood inundation levels so that we get a pretty good match with our photographic evidence. And again, this is showing 7th Avenue. Now, what I like about this one is it provides a pretty good illustration of where, when we talk about sandbagging, when we put the pedestrian bridge in over the Dry Run Creek here, it's elevated. It's elevated to be above that 100-year floodplain. So we had to ramp up to it. So we already have berms built in place. So when we talk about sandbagging the north leg of the intersection, we would sandbag from like the corner of ramp curb mini storage across the roadway. That's the extent of our sandbagging. So upwards of maybe 2 feet high for 50 to 70 feet in length is what we're talking about. And in doing so, we keep the water from going into Crestwood Park, and we maintain access into this part of town. So that was April of 93. We get to August 93. It's now more substantial, but even with this one here, there's been some additions here at Ramp Curb Mini Storage, and we now have the pedestrian bridge across Dry Run Creek. Sandbagging across would also provide protection from the August 1993 flood. You would be able to access it from the south and come up and go into on 7th Avenue Southeast and access the neighborhood that way. Then we get into the floods of May of 2013 and September of 16. They were very similar. This is showing the high water in Harlington Place cul-de-sac, and it was taken shortly after the water started to recede, but you can now pick out the debris line, so we know how high the water got. Iowa Flood Center mapping. Again, we can correlate the elevations. Here's Harlington Place cul-de-sac, so we know this is a good representation illustration. And then here being able to sandbag across over to the sidewalk on the northeast corner. Again, preventing the water from crossing 7th Avenue and maintaining access from the south and using 7th Avenue into the neighborhood.
How much available freeboard would you have before it would go into Ramker at that point?
Ramker is, I think most of it is within 6 to 12 inches of the 100-year flood elevation. So where it showed...
You see that straight line where that dry run that goes by the bowling alley comes out. At that point, I get just curious how high between the water level and between the level of the Ramper's mini storage. I mean, you have
we're gonna,
2 foot, 3 foot.
so the 100-year cuts through the mini storage units. So at that point where it transitions from purple to yellow, it's 0 depth, and by the time you move to the northeast corner, I'm thinking it's maybe a foot and a half deep. So they're finishing up the report. It's good documentation. There's no action required tonight. Just want you to kind of think about it, and if you come up with questions as we move into strategic planning and budgeting, we think that this is a project that warrants further consideration and discussion. When looking at, the FEMA level flood improvements, $14 million, and there's maybe 30 homes that would benefit from that. So that's not going to have a favorable benefit cost. As we move down, the cost of the improvements move down, but even to the point where you're trying to provide flood protection that's equal to the 100-year flood elevation, it was like $6 million. So this is taking it down to trying to maintain access into this neighborhood for a 50-year event, which would be those events from August of 93, April of 93, May of 13, September of 16. So less than a 50-year event.
So what's the relationship between the options that we have here for this and anything that we may or may not do with the 3rd Street Bridge? In other words, how do those relate to one another? And what is, sort of holistically speaking, looking at everything, most optimal if you were putting two things together in that part of town?
Well, so if you're not going to do 3rd Street as a vehicle bridge, but let's say the pedestrian bridge was still moving forward, I would be encouraging further consideration on the 7th Avenue Southeast improvements, because this maintains two-way traffic into that neighborhood, that residents can use it, not just emergency responders, but all residents would be able to continue accessing this neighborhood. You keep access, you keep power. You keep power, you keep sump pumps operational, okay? If we do a PED bridge and not do this, the power company is still going to have to, and gas company is probably still going to have to be looking at if we have another September 16 flood, of doing the same thing that they did, of disconnecting the services.
And what about doing nothing with the just removing it, not having a bridge there, or having a vehicular bridge there?
So if there's a vehicle bridge there, this is, again, representing that August 1993 flood, which is like right at a 50-year flood event. And so this is showing the existing truss bridge with a new vehicle bridge these little areas here on the north and south side go away because of the bridge
Elevation.
approaches, right, an elevation change. So you would not
Which
need
flood
this.
is this then? This is the,
August of '93, which is like a representative of a 50-year flood event. Okay, now I'm going to switch it back to the presentation here, and this shows the purple is the 100-year flood. So you can see that it looks like they're, again, with the ram, it's going to be very close. And so again, if the water's only a few inches deep at a 100-year flood, so if it's a 90-year flood, you probably still have vehicle access. You probably still have vehicle access for certain vehicles during that 100-year. But that gets to be a tough decision then. At what point do you, in effect, close the neighborhood off and either mandate evacuation or encourage evacuations? Because, you know, are you going to go a little bit higher? When is the crest coming? Is it coming at night? Those are all the tough, challenging decisions.
So if I'm following correctly, then, well, what would you say? Okay, so for a 100-year flood, or a 50-year flood for that matter, with a vehicular bridge, what would be the optimal thing to do with 7th Street?
Leave it alone.
I mean 7th Avenue?
Yeah, leave it
Leave it alone, okay. So we wouldn't have to do anything there if we,
If you have a new vehicle bridge at 3rd Street.
okay.
On the 7th Avenue Southeast, if you were to move forward with that and maybe the 4th Street Southeast, what would be the time frame of taking the road out and putting it back in? How long would that take? It'd be a month or 2 months or to do it?
It could be done the fall of 18.
Okay.
Late summer of 18. But again, the proper process is to go through strategic planning, to consider what all the other projects and options are, go through the budget. So you're looking at a budget approval in March. You know, so you're probably more realistically looking at a 19 project, spring of 19, early 19. Okay, we got 2 more presentations to go through, so.
Yes.
Dan, when will the final report be able to finish up and get that to us?
Well, we wanted to take in any comments or anything we heard from here, so we'll go back and put that up. I would think in the next couple of weeks we can.
Okay,
get
2 to
that-
3 weeks.
Yeah,
Excellent.
2 to 3 weeks, we'll get that wrapped up.
Good.
Together, so.
so what impact of this, I guess another thing that's never addressed is the north and east side of the river. Does that have any effect, any of these changes?
I wouldn't think so.
Just maybe one last question. Raising it 2 feet, that's optimal as far as the 1st Street and 7th Avenue intersection, or can we look at going 2.5 feet or 3 feet?
Well, the reason we did that was the intersection is kind of, that's what we're tying into. If we would go any higher, we'd have to redo some of that intersection, and the limits would expand quite a bit because if we wanted to go that higher, we'd have to trace that back farther on 1st Street Southwest. So it would just increase the construction limits. And with the option of adding the sandbags, we're looking at keeping the cost down and staying out of that intersection during the construction.
When you say sandbags, are we talking sandbags or the HESCO barriers or?
Sandbags, because you want to be able to kind of go with the contour of the road and curb and gutter and stuff. So I know what you're referring to, Dan, about rebuilding that intersection. If we raise that, could that just be? Can you kind of blend that right on into elevated section so you don't even have to sandbag?
I just think, you know,
Possibility,
the
yeah.
Dry Run Creek Bridge there is fairly aged and, you know, would it
Yeah.
be proper time?
2025 project. Okay, thanks, Dan.
All right.
Thank you, Dan. Cedar River Parkway East improvements is our second discussion item for tonight. I think we have both Stanley and WHKS here. The engineers night has
So we got three more
phase two
engineers here. We got
motion.
Jeff Hilligans, Casey Faber is going to talk about the bridge. Dan Fullerton is, and in case Jeff stumbles, Dan's going to hop right up and fill right in.
Thanks, everybody. As Mike said, I'm Jeff Hilligans, project manager for the Cedar River Parkway improvements. This is phase 2. As you all know, phase 1 was completed in 2015. This corridor is a new corridor. It extends east from the existing Southwest 10th Street intersection and with 4th, and we're going to connect it to Highway 3 on the east end of town. As I said, we built about 3/4 of a mile from 4th Street to about 8th Street, and that was completed in 2015. And now we are embarking on the bridge across the river, and then continue with the roadway east to connect with Highway 3, East Bremer. You can see here the basic typical cross section for the road. It's a 2-lane road, 31 feet back to back. Has a parallel trail on the north side. This will basically be the roadway as it looks the whole length until you get right to the intersection of Highway 3, where we're widening out to 3-lane for a left and a right turn lane going out onto the highway. The bridge is also a 2-lane bridge. And Casey will talk a little bit more about the bridge in a minute. You can see here the entire corridor just to show you kind of what's been built so far. That's the piece that's in the box there. That's what's in place right now, almost up to the river. And then what we'll be building will start there from the berm that was started in the first project, and then across the river, and then over to Highway 3.
So just to clarify, on the cross-section that you're showing, what we put in so far on the parkway has the kind of boulevard in the middle.
Right.
This is not going to have it then beyond?
That's correct. Yeah, no boulevard on this section. Yep. Just a 2-lane road. Okay, so Casey's going to talk a little bit about the bridge and where we sit now.
Thanks, Jeff. So as Jeff mentioned, we've got plans into the city for their review, and we've been coordinating between ourselves and Stanley to make sure everything ties in nicely. But just a couple of things that I want to hit on the bridge. The first thing there that's kind of circled in red there is at the piers, right as we cross the river, we ran into some interesting conditions with rock elevations really up and down, and so it kind of threw some of our design out the window, and we had to coordinate with Braun Intertech is not here tonight, but provide great advice as far as how we were tying into that rock and what's quality and all that kind of stuff. So that was some of the construction challenges that we had to deal with as we were designing the piers. The next item is you see here, talking mostly about what's on this bridge from an enhancement standpoint. So those circles there are the light blisters. We'll show them in a little bit closer view coming up here, but we coordinated with Waverly Power and Light to make sure that we were providing the right lighting for their typical designs, worked with their engineers to get that all coordinated. We've got a pretty long bridge. It's actually split into 2 units, and so the 2 sheets, this is the second bridge, each 3 spans, so 6 spans total. The second bridge, we ran into the same kind of a construction issue with elevations. All that's been mitigated, but it was really, without that in advance, the knowledge of where the rock was going to be, we didn't know what our footings were going to be like, and so that was one of the biggest unknowns that we entered design with, but through a coordination with Braun and with Stanley, have great solutions there. Again, you can see here where we've got light blisters, which are just the piece that sticks out. It looks like a blister on the side of the bridge. That's why it's called that. That supports the light poles. The other thing that we wanted to talk about is kind of the aesthetics of what's going on. So we put these together earlier this year. They don't exactly represent what will be in place in the final construction. We'll talk about some of the differences. But as Jeff mentioned, we have a 2-lane, 32-foot roadway. That's 2 12-foot lanes and 4-foot shoulders on each side. So it's a nice wide bridge. You can see here that we're incorporating form liner aesthetically on the rails, and so it's half of the height. We've talked in past meetings, I've talked about some aesthetics that could be done in other parts of the city. This is what we were referring to possibly tying into. So we'll show some pictures of what that form liner looks exactly like in a second here. These light poles and the spacing that's on these aesthetics are not indicative of what's going to actually be built. We worked with the utility. They preferred to use more standard street lights with mast arms instead of a decorative light like this. So reduces some cost because we aren't using a highly decorative light. We're not using as many lights. We'll still have safely lit bridge. And then the last thing here was the guardrail that's shown here. We coordinated with Stanley and with Mike about maintenance issues and other concerns, just aesthetically how guardrail ties in. And we're actually not using guardrail off the bridge, but we're using more of the aesthetic rail and transitioning it properly for safety as well, which creates a nicer look as well as reduces some of the maintenance concerns around guardrail posts and concerns with bikers adjacent to guardrail posts and everything too. You don't have to worry about snags or anything like that. So here's a little bit closer view of the trail. We've got a 14-foot wide trail on the bridge. Again, showing the colored and textured form-lined rails. They'll be full height on the trail side of things. The rail here is not exactly what we are finalized on. It's a little bit bigger and bulkier, and so we actually went with something that opens it up to better views for travelers on the bridge. They'll have more access to see across the bridge and out their windows and everything, so I'll highlight that in just a second. But here's a cross-section of the bridge, again showing our widths and everything. The different barriers we'll talk about real closely in a minute, but including form liner and rails for safety, and as well as providing maximum visibility. And the other item we wanted to point out, just working with Waverly Utilities, they're thinking ahead about needs that they have getting conduit and everything across the bridge. So we're providing additional conduit suspended from underneath the deck to make sure that all their needs are met. Here's an exterior view. Again, the light poles, the guardrail isn't quite there in final design, but this textured form liner will be full height on exterior sides. You can see the sheets that we put together on all the specifications that we have to make sure that this gets built the way we want it. Has a certain look. We specify different suppliers and their exact item numbers so that it's kind of controlled in what this will come out looking like. It's a limestone type look, and you can see close up, I guess if you've got the presentation in front of you, you can see the heights of the different rail sections. So exteriors, trail faces are full height. Road faces, because they get some of that snow pile and salt, we don't have those full height. They're just the top half. That's textured and colored. Again, an exterior view, full height coloring and texturing. The light poles, just a reminder, we're using mast arms instead of these decorative ones. Final look at this blister, you can kind of see it sticking out there. We're texturing around that so it'll be seamless in the visibility from outside. You'll see texturing and coloring all the way around that light pole stand as well. We want to talk about railings quick. One of the things that we worked with Mike on that really provides some savings in cost is modifying the DOT standard. You can see how similar these sheets are. This is the sheet from our plans. This is the DOT sheet. And what we did was we took out the center rail. There's typically a middle rail, but we took that out and input stainless steel cables on the one side, on the pedestrian side. On the traffic side, we left it out altogether. This provides the necessary requirements for safety, but it also increases visibility. And so those enhancements are a really good option moving forward. It also reduces cost because primarily we're still a DOT standard rail just with some small modifications instead of using something that took us a lot longer to design, which is more expensive, and is non-standard for fabrication, which is more expensive. So I think that our results will be real good there as well. We wanted to highlight just some pictures of some projects that we've used very similar form liners and coloring on. So this is a project that we did in Ames. You can see the coloring is the same kind of a deal, the texturing, that on the trail and exterior sides we're full height, and on the roadway side, if you can kind of see in there close, we're half height on the top side. So it's a very similar layout there. Up close a little bit, you can see the color variation actually in our specifications and our notes. It's actually a 3-tone sealer color that they do all by hand, and it takes some time, but the results are really great. It looks very realistic in its final application. And this bridge is a couple years old now and looks really good maintenance-wise as well. So turn things back over to Jeff.
All right, thanks, Casey. A couple of other design elements we wanted to cover today. You're seeing the plan of profile of the underpass for the trail, the Waverly Rail Trail. What we did was we designed the road to go over top of the trail and put in a 12 by 12 box, basically a box culvert with flared ends for the entries for the trail. You can see in the profile view there, we're basically matching existing grade through there. We did have to realign the trail to go through this culvert since it's skewed to the existing trail. So I think the existing trail, the proposed trail is going to be concrete. So just to let you know, the surfacing, that's the same as the road and the parallel trail up top. And the trail will unfortunately be closed for a while during construction. We felt that this was the best approach in this area rather than to try and reroute traffic through this area while there's construction going on. We felt this was the best option. So just a couple of other features about the trail. You can see those flared entries. Those will have the same architectural treatment as Casey was showing on the bridge. So those will match. Those will have the limestone look as well. And also on top of those walls there will be fencing, I think similar to what was put in for the Dry Run Creek project on those culverts. It's the black black-clad chain link fence. And then just wanted to highlight the skew. It's a 35-degree skew for this culvert crossing the road. Just a little bit, you can see the cross section of the culvert there. It's a 12 by 12 culvert, which gives you some good clearance there on either side. Typically, the trail is 10 feet wide, 8 to 10. A lot of trails are 8 to 10 feet wide. This is a 12-foot culvert, so it'll give some nice clearance on both sides for two-way traffic. We also provided provisions for future lighting. We're not going to put lighting into the culvert for this project, but we'll have conduit in there, and we'll have places where you can mount light fixtures in the future if the city decides to do that. We did a couple of renderings of what it might look like when this is all built. This is a rendering. This is looking east along the roadway. You can see the underpass in the foreground, in the distance there, and then the parallel trail going over top alongside the road. Mm-hmm. This is looking through the underpass from one side. This would be the north side looking south, and you can see there the fencing and the form liner pattern on the walls. And then just a little wider view, you can see the rerouting of the trail in the foreground. That would be where the existing trail is now, and so we routed it around to go through the culvert through this area. The other thing I wanted to talk a little bit about is stormwater management. As you know, a lot of this road is being built up, which requires a fair amount of fill. We decided to try and get our fill from on site. So we have two borrow sites on this project. One, I'm calling the North Basin and the South Basin. So we were able to get all the fill that we need for the project on site here by using these borrow pits. And then these borrow pits will also double up as stormwater management features. There'll be sedimentation basins as well, retention basins as well. So you can see on this photo, or on this drawing, kind of the flow of the water. So roadside drainage and road drainage would go into intakes in the curb, and then be carried west through the storm sewer, across past where the underpass is, and then it will outlet into the North Basin there, where so the water, that'll be the first treatment location. Then it will have a controlled outfall from that basin back underneath the road, travel further east, collect the rest of the road drainage, and then outlet into the South Basin, which would be here. Then from the South Basin, we would do a controlled outfall into the river, which is there. Both of these basins are projected to be wet at most of the time, because of the elevations, because of the depth of the cut of the borrow that we need to have. There will probably be water in these basins most of the time. So we've got some illustrations that kind of will show what that might look like. The other thing we're looking at is wetland plantings around the edges and a little bit into the water on these basins for part of the restoration. So this is a rendering that shows the North Basin. We're looking northeasterly towards the basin. You can see the trail just beyond there. This would be what it might look like when it was filled with water just after a storm event. This is a cross-section of the North Basin. You can see it's got undulation. There's a deep section, and then a couple of shallower shelves where we could do some shallow water plantings, some wetland emergent plantings, and then some upland plantings on the slopes. Okay, just a little bit about the schedule. We're planning to finalize this design in early December and get it out for bids for a bid opening in early February, which would be followed by a public hearing mid-February. We're hoping to begin construction early April. As Mike said, it'll be 2 seasons of construction. First season, we expect to do drainage work, the bridge, most of the bridge work, the underpass and the trail connection. And then the second season, we'd finish up the bridge, do the paving for the road, and then open it to traffic after restoration. There is one other early construction that needs to happen. Do you want me to? Yeah. Mike's coming over. Okay.
Visual here.
Oh, okay. So we found out, I don't know.
Engineers permitting.
Yeah, through our permitting process, that we are in the zone of the northern, what is it? The northern long-eared bat, which means we can't cut trees after April 1st. And since the main project will start after that point, we need to have an early tree cutting project that happens prior to the main project. So we're looking at bidding that in December, having it awarded in January, and then having the trees all cut before the end of March.
The Corps of Engineers finally found a bat that covers half the United States. So. I think previously it was it the brown,
Indiana bat,
brown nose, or the Indiana bat?
Yeah.
And
so there's a pretty extensive. It goes all the way up through Minnesota. There's a pretty extensive range for this requirement.
And even though our core permit is just for the river crossing, it applies to the entire length of the project.
Correct. We have about between 8 and 9 acres of woodland that we're going to be clearing for this project, so.
Can't we just ship them somewhere? I mean, seriously.
Well, there was another option. If we did a detailed study to find out whether or not there are any habitat or any bats within that habitat or not, then we maybe could have avoided it if we could prove that there weren't any. But
The study may cost more than the tree removal, so the tree removal has to happen either way, and so I think that.
correct, yeah.
We have a 7-week window that we can go in, have a special contract, and I think they're probably just going to go with an excavator and pull them down.
And then have the next contract clear them away and clear and grub and do the rest.
How many acres did you say in total?
I think it's somewhere in the 8.5 area. We're still finalizing the exact area, but it's right around there. So there's a few trees right along the river, and then there's a line of trees going right down the middle of our road, in between the farm fields, and then there's some more woods near the trail. So that's where the majority of those trees are.
Any questions of Casey, Jeff, or even Mike?
I think Jeff's got one more
I
slide.
have one more slide.
Oh, okay.
Sorry. This is the fun one, the budget slide. You've all seen this summary in your packets. I just wanted to point out a couple of things. As everyone knows, the total cost of the project is about $700,000 more than what the funding that was set up previous to the design. Couple of things to point out. There's still $200,000 of contingency that we're holding with our design costs, with our construction costs, our construction estimate. We may not need all of that, so that could help bring the cost down a bit. And then there are several other items that are still estimates. One of them, the biggest one being the construction services estimate, construction administration estimate. So we're still looking at what that will be.
You usually go by the medium bids. We
For the
probably
construction
come in with a
estimate,
low
yes.
bid. We might save a little.
Yeah, that's at the end of my slide here. I just wanted to kind of point out what we did back in 2014 when we bid the phase 1 work. Our original estimate was about $3.6 million before construction. The bid cost was just slightly under $3 million, and final cost at the end of construction was about 2.9, a little bit less than 2.9. So we did save quite a bit on that project after the bids. This will be a very similar bidding time period from what we had on that project. So it's possible that we can get favorable bids and save some money there as well.
Okay. Questions?
Just got a text from a constituent wanting to make sure that the rail trail does connect up with the new trail that goes along, and
It does.
which page that shows. You've got
One of these renderings will show it. This rendering with the pond on it, you can see the connection just to the right of the pond there from the main trail, or from the existing trail up to the road there.
How long would the rail trail projected to be closed? Would it be closed the entire season or just for a couple months?
What we'll be shooting for is to have that trail back open possibly by Labor Day in the first season. But it's possible that it will be closed the entire first season, depending on the staging that the contractor chooses to do his work.
Quick question on your North Basin. The way it's drawn here, it's more of a wetland basin than a fishing pond basin.
Yeah, I don't know that it won't be particularly deep. I think the bottom, I have some notes. Yeah. So there will be a deep area, which won't be particularly large, but most of the pond will be relatively shallow, and there will be plant life that'll grow up. And I mean, if we get a long dry spell, it'll mostly dry probably. It'll always have some water in it, but.
Thank you.
And you said the trail would be concrete?
Yes, ma'am.
The
The side,
The trail, both the parallel trail next to the road and the connection to the underpass will all be concrete, yeah.
And why? Why concrete?
Why concrete?
Yeah.
well, the roadway's concrete,
Right.
trail concrete. It's when starting new like this, it's cost effective to keep it as one material, and concrete would be the most, have the best life cycle cost, the best value.
Okay.
It's interesting you ask about concrete because I live in Des Moines and we have lots of trails there. They tend to replace the asphalt trails with concrete when they upgrade. So because the asphalt trails get roots growing through them and they become kind of rough particularly for cyclists. So they tend to replace them with concrete when they go bad.
I've got a couple things I want to point out. So Casey, you said this is a 6-span bridge. How many of those spans actually cross the river?
Basically, just one is across the river under normal flows. If you go a ways back in your packet, you can see that. But a substantial portion of this is covering the approach and the floodplain and everything. So
It'll be, most of the construction should hopefully occur on dry land if done at a favorable time of the year.
yeah, there's really only 2 piers that are impacted by the banks of the stream, Pier 2 and Pier 3, the first ones that were circled in my first slide of my presentation. So, and the one, Pier 2, that's on the east side, the rock elevation is so high there that under normal flows, they probably can construct that pier without much effort to prevent flow or block any flow.
So again, this presentation was for information purposes only. There's no action you need to take in the immediate future unless you want to stop the process. We are, they're in the process of finalizing the plans. We are going to start to develop marketing literature to go out to grading, paving, and bridge contractors so that they're all made aware of it. So basically, once the plans are ready, they can, in effect, get their order in and get them downloaded and start taking a look at it. So this is a process that we used on the first phase of the Cedar River Parkway project. We also used it on the repair of the 3rd Street Southeast Bridge, and I think it's been well worth the effort to go out and make sure that the contractors, certainly within our geographic region, are aware of it and can start thinking about it earlier rather than later.
Where are we at in terms of land acquisition?
Just got the appraisals all done, and we've sent out everything to all the landowners, and we're going to start this week. We'll start this week talking to people.
That's kind of detail.
I guess that brings me to my last question, is just how that timeline fits into our budgeting cycle. It seems like it's almost before we officially approve a budget, and
Yeah, I mean, it is. I will say, if I can candidly say, it's one of the few projects, no offense to the council, that's been pretty unanimously moving forward. We're hoping that continues to be the case. It's the most sizable project we've done in some time. You're talking close to $11 million. And that's going to make the funding very challenging. It may be 2 years to fund this because of our capacity issues we currently have, much less with the other projects that are being considered. So when we do our pre-budget meeting mid-November, it's going to be pretty critical that we get an idea of where do you want to go with your prioritization of these projects, because we may or may not be able to get them all in the next year. And all of this definitely cannot probably get done in the next year as far as funding. The biggest challenge is this may be done by the time the second round of funding could even occur. which gets in a whole nother issue that I don't even want to get into tonight because it's got a headache already on my plate. I don't know how to fund it yet. The entire thing, we'll figure it out. It's going to take some time depending on what other projects we're looking at. And so that's why it'll be critical in November to get a list of where your priorities sitting as a council. How are we going to move forward? Is it this? Is it other projects? Is it a combination? We're running scenarios for days now, and it's just trying to figure out how. But from a budgeting standpoint, we'll be finishing budget in January, February, about the time bids come in. We won't actually go to budget hearing to probably early March, probably the 6th, somewhere in there. So it will fit. We'll have decent estimates by then once plans are completely constructed. We'll have a good idea where the quantities have been, pricing per quantity. We'll have a little more fine-tuned estimate. But if we get bids in on the 6th, we can still adjust. It just may take an extra meeting in council to determine how to move forward if, in fact, the bids are not where we want them to be. So it's going to be close. It's going to be very tight.
Other questions? Jeff Casey, thank you both.
Thank you.
20th Street Northwest reconstruction is our next item of discussion. I think we have Clear Engineering with us, and Mike will MC.
Okay, our third and final presentation is Ryan Davis with McClure Engineering is here, and he will be presenting on the 20th Street Northwest reconstruction. This is a design concept. We look at this is the same process that we used on the Cedar River Parkway in 2010 and 11 when we developed what are referred to as 30% design concept plans. So from that, we have more detailed information that has identified the challenges and the issues related to the project development, and we have much better engineering cost estimates at this point. So Ryan is going to step through that. We had started the process by holding neighborhood input meetings. We had 2 wonderful meetings that were hosted by the residents of Eisenach Village at their clubhouse, and were very well attended, not only by representatives of Eisenach Village, but also residents of the 20th Street Northwest corridor. Looks like Ryan's up and ready to go, so I will turn it over to Ryan.
Honorable Mayor, members of the council, thank you very much for hearing me tonight. As Mike said, my name is Ryan Davis. I'm with McClure Engineering out of Clive, Iowa. 20th Street Northwest reconstruction. The city has kind of laid out originally going from 5th Avenue all the way up to 205th Street in 3 different phases. So our mindset that we kind of laid out when we started thinking about this project was, let's go into this with an open slate and hear what the residents in the area have to say, which Mike kind of elated to on having neighborhood meetings. So what we did, we started out, we laid out basically maps, open blank maps, just aerials showing what's out there today. And we started those conversations with the residents out there, asking them what they wanted. Currently it's a rural street, it's a 2-lane rural street, open ditches. Do they want urban design, curb and gutter, or do they want to continue with having the open ditches? Another thing that we talked about was complete streets. Just like every other municipality in the state, everyone's really accepted complete streets. So we talked about what that could possibly look like in the area. We showed them some diagrams of different kinds of streets, on-street bike lanes, trails off to the side, curb and gutter, sidewalks, etc. Another thing that we talked about in those meetings with the residents out there was the rail. So we have the CN's main line and then a spur line within 200 feet of each other, and there's some site issues going on out there, and those two crossings don't have any arms to protect. So what's the possibility of putting signal arms out there, and what's everyone's thoughts and acceptance of that? And then another one is utilities. So if you're not aware, Mid-American is supposedly starting to put some high voltage lines out there in the next coming years, potentially having more and new reliable water main out there, and potentially putting other utilities through the corridor that don't exist today. Like Mike said, it was the first meeting was May 9th, I believe, of this year. Well-attended meeting, great comments. We had boards all around the clubhouse out there. We had people putting post-it notes on those boards so we could have actual comments that we accepted at the meetings. We also accepted comment cards that were mailed in to us. From those comments that we received, there were quite a bit, around the range of around 49 comments that we received. 24 of those comments were related to design requests. So can we make this road 26 feet, or can we make this road wider? Can we put curb and gutter on it? 12 of the 24 design requests that we received talked about complete streets and whether or not they liked them. After that, 17 of the comments were construction requests, keeping dust control down, what's going to be the access to my house when this is under construction, followed by 4 rail questions and a couple of utility questions were the official comments that we received. So after looking at those comments, we kind of went back to the planning board and drew up some stuff. Went back and forth on some design iterations. We were kind of tasked with looking at speed limits, design speeds of this roadway out here, what could happen. And so the iterations that I'm talking about is we played with the speed limits and the curves, design criteria that we're tasked with as engineers, how to relate that back to whether or not we have good earthwork. There's a lot of this corridor is extremely flat, so we also have to take in consideration drainage concerns. If we go curb and gutter, where are we going to be routing the stormwater? How are we going to be routing the stormwater? A large percentage of this project area is not developed yet, so we might be routing it into farmland. So those are all design considerations that we looked at. After looking at those design considerations, it was pretty outstanding that the 40-mile-an-hour design speed / 35-mile-an-hour posted speed limit kind of met a majority of our design criteria, which also kind of meets what this roadway function classification is potentially going to be in the future for the city as a major collector. Those were kind of the design criteria that we kind of matched around for the roadway part. Going back to the comments that we received during the comment portion is a large majority wanted trail along the corridor. And as you know, there is a bike trail out there that goes around that pond just south of the Eisenach Village, as well as a trail that goes in and around the retirement facility south of there as well. So we kind of wanted to go along with those comments, and we included a 10-foot trail on the east side of the roadway to help out with that. Another thing that we're considering on this project is water main for the Eisenach Village. The Eisenach Village water is supplied from the east, north of the rail. It's kind of on a dead end. So one thing that we could possibly do with this project, if we are going to be taking a look at the rail crossings, is potentially extending a water main from Fifth Avenue up to the Eisenach Village, so we can have a loop there for the water main and have better reliability for the residents in that area. So those were kind of the design iterations that we kind of looked at and considered. So we went back to the public and having another neighborhood meeting in June of this year. And the first thing that we addressed were detour considerations for when the project was going to go on for Phase 1. So you can see there we kind of laid out 3 different options for the residents there to consider. The first option would be to connect a dead-end road, paved road that Eisenach Village has existing, extend that up, to 20th Street via a temporary gravel connection. The second option we proposed was to make a permanent connection into the Jadestone neighborhood. And then the third option was to either do a temporary or a permanent connection to the neighborhood to the north as well, as you can see there. As you can see, we kind of laid out prices for those options. One of the considerations for option number 1 was, what if the construction vehicles come in and tear up the concrete that's existing in our neighborhood? Are you going to be replacing that? So we took a look at that, and so that's where you see that second kind of option underneath there. If we had to replace that concrete, that'd be right around $50,000. The second option would be fully permanent, and we put that at what did I put that at? $92,000. And then the third option, connecting to the neighborhood to the north, was right around, $115,000. So we took a vote after our second meeting, and the neighborhood voted for the second option. But after really looking into what the possibilities of design for Phase 1, we really think that option 1, with the price being where it was the most economic and feasible option that we could present. The other thing that we kind of took a look at and presented at the second meeting was we threw a design into this for all 3 phases. We went with a curb and gutter section, and as I was talking about on the design considerations and iterations, we kind of smoothed out some of the vertical curves and got the drainage and stormwater to work quite well and match existing. So that's what you kind of see in this slide, and that's what we presented to the neighborhood during the second meeting, which was actually really well received. As you can see, we connect to the trail, like I discussed before, and the connection via between Phase 1 and Phase 2 really worked out well. If there is a considerable time gap, that you could build Phase 1 and transition smoothly into Phase 2 existing pavement. So, like I said, we presented a curb and gutter section at the second meeting. And what you can see here is up above is what's out there existing. It's a 66-foot right-of-way, open ditch, 2-lane roadway. What we are proposing with this one is to make it a 100-foot right-of-way, and that would supply adequate parking to put future utilities in, and also supply a sidewalk and trail and lighting. So that's one thing that would need to take place, is the purchase of additional right-of-way, which we kind of get into this next slide here. On Phase 1, there's potentially a little over 4 acres of acquisition that needs to take place for right-of-way, and just under 2 acres of temporary easement that needs to take place. 10 homeowners that would be affected in Phase 1. For Phase 2, again, a little over 5 acres. We didn't really take a look at temporary easement for Phase 2 just because that's too far out in the future. Phase 2 and Phase 3 is too far out in the future, but on Phase 3, there's only 2 homeowners because that's where we get into the undeveloped land and just farm owners on either side of the street. Now, to go back, the most important part of this project that we're focusing on is rail coordination. Like I stated, there are 2 crossings on 20th Street Northwest. As a part of this project, we are also tasked with looking at 5th Avenue, putting sidewalk and narrowing the roadway in that location as well. So what we're doing with rail is we are coordinating with the Canadian National Railway and the Iowa DOT. So the city entered into an agreement with the Iowa DOT and Canadian National Railway back in June of this year to do signal work on 20th Street Northwest. Within that agreement, Canadian National Railway agreed to design the signals and install the signals within 18 months, which is essentially end of 2018. Now, that agreement did not talk about widening the roadway on 20th Street Northwest, but we have been in talks with CN. They do know that we do plan to widen the roadway. One of the things that we are trying to do is coordinate that. So when railways install signals, they're held to standards of where those signals go, behind the back of curb, by sidewalks, by trails. So we don't want them to install the new signals without our planned roadway extension here. So we are in talks with them. In our talks, they're acceptive of the roadway extension that we plan to do, and they believe that they can fit that into their schedule. So going that, and that's on 20th Street and 5th Street. So we don't plan on doing anything to the railway at 5th Street. It's a really wide roadway there. We plan to really narrow it down there and provide room for a sidewalk on the south side of the road to help connectivity in that area of town. We took a look at cost estimates of very similar bids that have been received in the last year in the area, and our cost estimates for 20th Street Northwest is right around $2.2 million, and that's for construction. And then the 5th Avenue is $160,000 for construction as well. Projecting out into Phase 2 and Phase 3, we didn't do as much detailed analysis, but enough to where we felt comfortable giving a cost estimate. So cost estimate for Phase 2 would be $2 million, and then cost estimate for Phase 3 would be $1.6. I will hold questions here for a second. We do have a video that we kind of presented, put together just for a kind of a visualization to help everyone kind of visualize what the potential for this area could be. So as we're kind of flying into the area, we've got Phase 1 starting at 5th Avenue, and we're kind of narrowing in here to the railroads. And like I said, there's your main line and your spur. What CN plans to do is put 4 arms there, so each crossing has a northbound and southbound arm. Right there, we're coming to the main Eisenach Village entrance. One of the main concerns with the residents out there is the returns. We need to make the returns wider so delivery trucks don't break their curb and create ruts out there. As we proceed through the corridor, you'll come up here. This is where we show that temporary access, option 1, that we are recommending if we proceed forward with this. And then we get to the end of Phase 1 and enter into Phase 2 there. Very same structure, 100-foot right-of-way, 2-lane road with the trail on the east side of the roadway. And it pretty much remains this way through the entire corridor. We'll get to the end of Phase 2 here, and we'll kind of back out, and we'll do a little wide span aerial view so you can really see what the limits of phase 1, 2, and 3 are in conjunction with the area out here. And with that, I can hopefully answer any questions that you have.
Your cost estimates, you referenced water main stability enhancements out there. Does that include any water main work or?
Yes, yep. In phase 1 with the 2.2 estimate, that does include the water main.
Other questions?
Well, he cleaned up the video because he took the neat stuff out. They had the drone going underneath a car and causing an accident. So I told him he ought to leave it. So I think that it's interesting to see how technology is advancing so that we're actually able to visually, drive or fly the corridor and overlay aerials and see how the farmsteads and the adjacent features are going to be impacted or benefited from a project like this. What I do want to talk about is when we started this project, we kind of had a budget number in mind of about $1.5 million, and as Ryan has shown, that once we got into the design and really identified the challenges and the issues and the concerns along the corridor from a design build standpoint, that cost estimate started to go up. Now we are including, if you go to my agenda memo, it does include the crossing gates and signals because from a budget standpoint, they've been combined into one project account. So I wanted to kind of show everything that is being identified in that project account, which is the railroad improvements with the signals and the gates, plus any roadway reconstruction we do. And we've also added the much-needed repairs on the Fifth Avenue Railroad approaches. So when we rebuilt that roadway in 1998, we did not touch the concrete railroad approaches. And the good news is we got another 20 years out of them. But they are in bad shape. And so what we want to do is package this work with the railroad, because I'd prefer to deal with maybe two or three railroad issues at one time, as opposed to going back year after year after year with a new railroad project. So we think that there's benefit and efficiencies to be gained by coordinating these two projects and rebuilding those concrete approaches at Fifth Avenue. Water main reliability. This is a looping project to connect Bartles with Eisenach Village. Eisenach gets their water through Jadestone, and earlier this year, I think just a couple weeks ago, we all realized the impact where up in Country Meadows they had to do a water main repair project, and they shut water down to all of Jadestone, all of Eisenach for, I think it was about 4 to 6 hours while they did that water main repair. So looping water mains is very, very important to preserving that reliability. Something that Ryan didn't mention as well is that with the railroad work, we install a casing underneath the railroad tracks to service the water main. But other utilities that are also, so many of them now are underground, that we're talking about installing a duct bank for future utilities. So this would be, maybe you can describe what it is, but it provides for like 4-inch conduits or 3-inch conduits or a variety of sizes. And
any combo of conduit that you can really think of. There are limitations on how much you can fit in there, But yeah, typical, you can fit in at least 8 2-inch, 4 3-inch, and 3 4-inch.
So whether it's electrical or telephone or cable or telecommunications, those would be in place and available for utility companies to lease from the city or get permission to use them. So in effect, our budget is outside our expectations and our comfort level, and so we gave some thought and consideration to if we're working on a limited budget, what is the most important thing that we need to be looking at to get done? And as Ryan alluded to, we have this agreement with the railroad for the crossing gates and signals that that work needs to be done by the end of 2018. So what we're identifying is the most important, the most critical component of this project is everything related to the railroad. So going forward, we may not have enough financing available to do all of the Phase 1 construction, but in taking a look at it, there should be sufficient funds identified and budgeted, that $1.5 million, to do everything associated with the railroad. So that would take care of the railroad signals and gates. It would take care of, on 20th Street, upwards of 350 to 400 feet of paving along that corridor. It would take care of the water main, casing pipe, the duct bank underneath the railroad, as well as the railroad approaches on 5th Avenue Northwest.
Thank you.
Can you go back, Mike, for a minute to the access points and just clarify who the property owners are there?
Sure. Okay, so north is to your right, west is up, and south is to your left. So going north out of Eisenach, which is to the right, which is your option 3, I believe that is owned by Bartles or Eisenach for their next phase. Option 1 is all owned by Eisenach. Elizabeth Drive is the private drive servicing a couple of units near to the northwest corner of their property. We're looking at utilizing that, extending it, as Ryan indicated, to put a temporary drive in and then remove it. Could be upwards of $30,000. We've kind of looked at a worst-case scenario. What if during the use of this temporary access, let's say Elizabeth Drive is damaged or totally destroyed and had to be replaced? So we've identified that as potentially another $50,000. We don't think that's highly likely, but we put a budget number to it in the event that 100% of Elizabeth Drive had to be removed and replaced.
That would be not combined, that's separate. So we'd be dealing with, if we got to replace, we're dealing with 80? Okay.
That'd be correct.
Correct, yeah. Okay. Connecting to Jadestone involves a third party. That would be Wartburg. And it's not readily available at this time. And it would not, we were hopeful that maybe it would be available or would meet our timeline, but even if we had all the financing in place, we no longer feel that we can get a permanent roadway built before the reconstruction on 20th Street would start. Okay. So the railroad, if we do like a Phase 1 Part A that only involves the railroad, then there's no temporary drives that need to be built. They would have to go around to the north and come back in on 12th Street, but we would not be building any temporary drives to complete the railroad work.
And then, did you mention, or did someone mention that potentially for all three phases, we're talking about 10 homes that could be affected?
For phase one, there was, I think, 10 property owners that have some acquisition.
For right of way. Okay.
No structures.
No.
Just, yeah, okay. So property acquisition in terms of right-of-way access.
Right. The existing
On their
corridor,
property.
the existing roadway corridor is 66 feet wide, and so we're looking at an additional 17 feet on
Okay.
the west and east.
Thanks.
Shortening phase one up just to go past Eisenach's main entrance would gain us a whole lot.
No, because we have to reprofile the hills and valleys. And so if you went just past, you might have a pretty substantial transition like they have on Bremer Avenue from the old to the new pavement. Okay, there, and you may have no good lines of sight either. So at that point, it becomes a safety issue and concern.
Mike Davis from Clive, Iowa. We thank you for your contributions. Any final questions? Okay, thank you very much.
If I could ask one question, I noticed in here there was some state funding going back to the extension of the Parkway. There was no state funding there, so we're not thinking of allocating the $1 million bridge money to that versus a Third Street project, or?
And the concern with that, just like with the Corps of Engineers permit, you need the permit to do the bridge, but it affects the entire corridor. So if you use some federal bridge funding on the corridor, it now makes the entire project subject to federal wage requirements and everything else. So at that point, you lose the benefit of the grant.
And I don't believe we can
That
even
piece-
apply the $1 million to this. It's not an existing bridge. Like, it has to be an existing bridge to get the state bridge funds to do the project. So since it's a new bridge, it would not qualify.
Which is also why, because I've gotten questions from citizens about that, why the $1 million that we've talked about on occasion wouldn't apply to the 10th Cedar River Parkway Bridge.
Our fourth presentation is from Utilities, Waverly Utilities on their rate schedules, and we do thank Dara Wenzel for being with us and all your wonderful work. Look forward to this presentation. We'll allow the room to clear here a little bit first, but.
There it is. Our slideshow. No.
Thank you.
All right. Good evening, Honorable Mayor, City Council members, staff, audience. Thanks for allowing me to talk tonight. I am not an engineer, so maybe we can get done less than 30 minutes, but we'll proceed. a lot of talk in town recently about utility rates, and we thought it was a good idea to get some facts out there about where our utility rates stand. So we put this presentation together, and what we want to start with is, Waverly Utility is owned by the citizens of Waverly. So we're also overseen by a board of trustees. And those board of trustees, they live here, they work here. Some are retired executives, some are small business owners, one's a retired school superintendent. So those are local folks that oversee our operations. We also have a local management team that has many, many years of management experience in the municipal utility world. I think it's important to note that we also live and work here, and we have a staff of 34 employees. 25 of those are electric employees, and 9 of them are telecommunications employees. That's a $2.4 million payroll that goes back into the Waverly economy. Our employees also give a lot of their time to volunteer in the community. So we have complex jobs. These are good paying jobs. These are complex jobs that we do, and we're proud to be here in Waverly. So with that, we jump forward to electric rate discussion. So where do we start? We can start with the national average. What is the national average for electricity? According to the APPA national study, in 2017, the national rate per kilowatt hour in the United States is 12.8 cents. So in Waverly, we have a winter rate that stands for 7 or 8 months out of the year. Our average winter rate is 12.7 cents per kilowatt hour. And that's across, that's residential rates. Our average residential summer rate is quite a bit higher. It's 15.1 cents. And that was actually put in place by design. So our summertime rates, we increment. Once you go past 1,100 kilowatt hours, you're going to hit an 18 cent per kilowatt hour rate. That was a behavioral rate that was put in place to get people to use less energy during our peak season, which is June through September. And we'll see a slide later to see how Waverly peaks during that period and how homeowners actually affect that peak. So if you combine the 4 months at the higher rate, 8 months at the lower rate, our average rate for 2017 is 13.6 cents per kilowatt hour on our residential rates. We've shown this comparison before. How do we compare to those directly around us? You'll note that we're right in the middle. Alliant is the highest in their winter revenues. Butler County is next. Waverly Utilities at 12.7, Mid-American and Cedar Falls. If you go to the summertime rates, Alliant is the highest, Waverly Utilities is the second highest, then Butler, Mid-American, and Cedar Falls. So these are actual comparisons of bills. So they're not taken from a report, but actual bills themselves. So before we go too much further here, we're going to use some words. I want to explain what those mean. We're going to talk about energy. Energy is measured by kilowatt hours. Probably the best way to remember that is a small child that can run around for an entire hour. That's a kilowatt hour. So when we say demand, what is demand? It's measured in kilowatts. And if you think of a factory turning on all their lights, all their machines, when they first get there at 8 o'clock in the morning, they turn everything on, they place a demand on the system. And that's measured in kilowatts. We're going to talk about capacity markets. What exactly is a capacity market? On the MISO market or in the federal market, you could think of a capacity market as an insurance plan for the grid. When demand is placed upon the grid, energy's got to be available, and it's got to be available right now at the flip of a switch. So Waverly Utilities, we sell our generators or their capacity into the Mid-Continent Independent System Operator capacity market. So those rates, how we compare with the other 183 Iowa utilities. So there are a total of 183 utilities, electric utilities, in the state of Iowa. Compared to those utilities, Waverly Utility is 22nd lowest in the state, overall revenue requirement from every kilowatt hour sold of 9.4 cents. So what you're doing is you're combining residential, commercial, and industrial rates. You combine all three of those together, and there's additional information in your packet that will show this. Who's the lowest? Denison is the lowest at 6.2 cents, and the highest in the state, Denison's a municipal. The highest in the state is Collender, Iowa. That's a municipal as well at 16.5 cents per kilowatt hour. So if we look at a chart, easier to see this. But Waverly is a yellow bar. So you've got Denison on the extreme left, extreme lowest. You have Mid-American, Cedar Falls, and right above Waverly would be Alliant, Butler County, and clear on the right-hand side would be Collender at their 16.5 cents. That's kind of visualized out of the 183 where we stand. I think it's a fair question to say, why is Denison the lowest? And there's really a simple answer. Denison receives up to 60% of their wholesale power from the hydro dams on the Missouri River. It's known as a WAPA allocation.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, if the watershed, if your town is in the watershed that leads to the Missouri River, you're given a WAPA allocation. That's less than 3 cent power on the wholesale level. So that contributes to why they're the lowest in the state. Now, you can only get this if your watershed flows in the Missouri. Waverly does not. But I think it's important to note that when we're trying to compare apples to apples, why is Denison lower? So, where are we compared to all of the WAPA allocation utilities in the state of Iowa? So this chart kind of shows where we stand, but we don't get WAPA, but that's where we stand. All the rest of them are WAPA allocated utilities. So if you look at that long list of utilities that's in the packet, anything with a blue line on it was a WAPA allocation. If, brings up an if question, if Waverly did get a WAPA allocation, where would you rank in the state? Well, our revenue requirements would drop to 7.65 cents per kilowatt hour, and we would rank the 8th lowest in the state. So WAPA allocation has dramatic impact on your rate structure. So that's where we would. But that's a moot point. We're not going to get WAPA. So let's look at Mid-American. Why are Mid-American rates so much lower than Waverly Utilities? Another fair question. It's a good question. But it also has a simple answer. Federal and state tax subsidies for wind production. Based on a Des Moines Register's article, because they're a private company, we can't see these numbers, but the Des Moines article said that in 2016 they received $249 million in federal subsidies. They get 2.3 cents per kilowatt hour produced by wind, and they get that for 10 years. Over 10 years, that's $2.5 billion. There's also a state incentive that they can get. We really don't know how much of that state incentive they get, but that's another 1.5 cents per kilowatt hour. Well, let's look at what Mid-American does not do for their communities compared to maybe what Waverly Utility and other utilities do. But before I get that, I want to back up a second. Waverly Utility taxpayers are subsidizing Mid-American's lower rates. And it's a little bit irritating when you think about that. We're subsidizing their lower rates through federal subsidies. When you pay your federal income tax, a portion of that's going to Mid-American. But what does Mid-American not do for their cities? They don't pay for city streetlights. They don't pay for the energy used by the streetlights. They don't pay for operating and maintenance of city traffic lights. They don't pay for replacing streetlights during reconstruction, such as Bremer Avenue. So if they don't do it, who does? Taxpayers do in those communities, not the ratepayers. Also, they do not pay the city 2.91% of their revenues. Mid-American does not pay for electric infrastructure extensions to new homes, businesses, or new housing developments. Mid-American does not provide emergency backup generation to the community. They do not assist the city with tree trimming and removal. So these are things that Waverly Utility has done, and they've done since they started being a municipal utility. So let's talk about some things we do and what they cost. So So last year we paid $115,931 in new streetlights. We paid $266,000 for energy usage of those streetlights, $13,000 for the traffic lights, $33,000 in labor to assist the city with tree cutting and removal. We're paying $402,000 over a 2-year period for the new lights on Bremer Avenue. We pay the city, paying the city $406,000 for payment in lieu of taxes. On average, we spend $700,000 a year expanding our electric infrastructure extensions to new homes, businesses, and housing developments. And of course, we provide emergency backup power to the entire community. So what would happen to Waverly utility rates if taxpayers and individuals picked up these expenses instead of the ratepayers? We could lower your rate by 0.0073 or 3/4 of a penny per kilowatt hour. Where would we rank in the state if we did that? We would rank 16th lowest at 8.67 cents per kilowatt hour revenue. So on the chart, you can see where we would go from 22nd to 16. I've showed this chart to the council before, but why have our rates increased? Again, this one's pretty simple. You can see that for decades we paid $1.5 million for energy. We paid about $500,000 for transmission. The MISO market opened. Mid-American joined MISO market in 2009. Transmission costs have doubled. There's been an $8.8 million increase in annual G&T, our generation and transmission costs. Rates had to go up to cover this increase. That's a 444% increase in wholesale costs. So we look at that, well, what things can we really control? What can the Board of Trustees control? What can the management team control? Well, utility operation costs. And what have those costs done over the past decade? We've shown this slide as well. The blue line represents how much G&T have gone up. The red line is O&M. Since 2010, the board has overseen a reduction in O&M of 8.7 cents, or 8.7%, which is about a $300,000 decrease in operating costs. During that same time, the CPI has increased 10.15% over those same 7 years. I think the board has done a heck of a job overseeing O&M. Put those in a pie chart. 2010, the red is generation and transmission. That was $8.9 million, or 64% of our expenses. O&M was $3.357 million, or 24% of our expenses. And depreciation and capital was at 12%, or $1.6 million. 7 years later, generation and transmission is now up to $13 million, $13.5 million. O&M has been reduced to $3,051,000, or 16% of our expenses. Depreciation and capital has inched up to 13% at $2.3 million. Another fact, since 2010, we have added 242 new electric customers. That's 5.2% growth in the last 7 years. From our perspective, Waverly is growing. Staff has done an excellent job reducing operating costs and during a growth period. So, what is Waverly Utilities doing to stop or lower rate increases? Well, as I mentioned at the last council meeting that I attended, working directly with Mean to reduce our portfolio costs. We're replacing purchase power agreements, high-cost purchase power agreements that were bought before the recession with new lower agreements. We are putting the engines in the capacity market for additional revenues to offset expenses. The new Waverly Telecommunications Utility is paying a $200,000 lease to the electric ratepayers for leasing the fiber. The electric ratepayers loaned the telecommunications utility $2.6 million. That was paying 0.1% interest. They're now earning 4.38% interest, or an increase of $101,000 to the electric ratepayers. Management team salaries have been reduced by allocating a portion of their salaries to the telecommunications utilities. And last year that was $158,000. We're also looking through our strategic planning at a new residential billing, residential demand billing scenario. Again, as I stated earlier, we're going to see a chart where reducing our demand will reduce everybody's costs. And of course, we continue strong advocacy for energy efficiency and conservation effort by consumers. And is energy efficiency or are energy efficiency and conservation efforts effective? Since 2007, over 9 million kilowatt hours have been saved by electric users. At today's rates, that's $1.229 million in savings. And since 2007, we've reduced peak demand by 4.9 million kilowatt hours. Those are kilowatt hours that haven't been purchased. So let's look at two comparable homes, because I think this demonstrates energy efficiency and conservation. Two very similar homes. One has an average bill of $109 a month. One has an average bill of $268 a month. Both built by the same contractor, same year, same good sense home provisions. Both have walkout basements. Home number one's 200 square feet smaller. It's 3,288 square feet. Home number two is 3,500 square feet. Home number one used 9,622 kilowatt hours last year. Home number two used 22,380 kilowatt hours. So the annual cost is more than doubled in home number two. So home number two since 2012 has not applied for any energy efficiency rebates, no programmable thermostats, no home audits. We have no record of home number two. Home number one has done all three of those in the name of energy efficiency and conservation. So certainly lifestyle and usage will affect how much you pay in your monthly bill. So it does pay to conserve. There's that chart I was talking about. Waverly Utilities load curve, January through December. You'll notice the blue line on top with the green circle around it. That's our peak demand. Runs from June through September. And because of that peak, we pay $4.3 million in demand charges. Home number two, they peak from June to September. They're a direct contributor to our peak as a community. You can see home number one on the bottom has flattened it out. So it does pay to reduce our peak. Anything we can get off of that peak saves everybody money. So energy efficiency and conservation will help everybody save money in Waverly on their electric bill. So what are our rates going to do in 2018? Well, we're happy to say that there's no rate increase scheduled for 2018. I think the cost-saving efforts we've done in-house, the efforts we've taken with me, we've stopped this annual increase in energy rates. So that's where we stand today. With that, do you want to take any questions?
That's quite a presentation. Thank you.
So,
Go ahead.
Daryl, as you know, I've researched both Waverly Light and Power and the surrounding areas, different utility companies. Had a real good conversation with a gentleman on the utility board in Independence, Mid-American Energy, some of their higher up management people. I guess my questions are, and I guess I did some research on my own as far as rates. Are you familiar with electricitylocal.com?
Never heard of it.
Never heard of it. It's pretty intuitive, and they do list as references National Renewable Energy Lab, the U.S. Department of Energy, U.S. Energy Information Administration, and the U.S. Census Bureau as the references. And you seem to always want to ball these rates up into one average for the entire community, and I think you need to break that out. And if you look at that, Waverly is at, according to this website, we're at 12.36 cents, which is right about where you're saying 13.6. Waterloo's paying 8.3, and this is residential rates. Cedar Falls 9.6, Denver 8.83. These are all Mid-American rates again. If you move into industrial, Waverly's at 7.78, Cedar Falls 6.3, Waterloo 4.23. These are all rates off this website, and I'm not sure that they're current rates, but I know that they're all relative.
Are those rates including energy cost adjustments? Without knowing what's in those
I can't
rates-
answer that, but again, they are all rates that are paid by the customer.
If you just go to a website and look at their kilowatt hour charge, it's not the same as what they charge customers.
This is cost per to the customer. So,
Without knowing the data, I can't verify that that's true.
and you're more than welcome to take a look at that and refute my research here, but I also look back. Independence right now is paying 17 cents residential. Harlan, which is also a community that you were part of, they're paying at 12.47 cents. And these rates, again, you look at Independence, they're paying 57% higher costs over the Iowa average. For commercial, they're paying 41% higher. Independence is 63% higher. And same way with Harlan. We're looking at Waverly, we're paying 14.2%, 32%, 46% above the Iowa average. Yeah, I don't see how you can say that we're in the middle. And really, the problem with this in the middle thing, we're trying to attract new businesses to town. How do we bump that up against Cedar Falls, Waterloo? How do we bump that up against Shell Rock? They're paying less rates. We're trying to get people to move into Waverly, to be taxpayers. How is that affecting the decision to either stay here and pay higher rates or even come here to live? I mean, these are things that we need to take advantage of. Good is the enemy of great. We can be average all the time. We hired James. We didn't pick the guy because he was average. We picked the best person that we can. So as these companies are out, these companies are out making a selection of where they're going to go and where they're going to do business. And they're taking into consideration rates. And they're going to look at this and they're going to say, I'm going to make the best decision. I'm going to pick the cheapest rates I can. And they're going to look at Waverly and they're going to say, well, you're average.
Well, I think you can make the same argument of a John Deere tractor. I'm going to take the cheapest tractor I can find. But I don't think cheapest means the best. It doesn't mean the best reliability. So I don't think cheapness is always the
Darryl,
number one
if
factor.
all you've got to throw out there is
If you lived in a
reliability.
town that had unreliable power, I think you would agree with me.
I don't see
Unreliable
anybody in
power
Janesville or
hurts
Denver.
every business that's on the system. If you're running CNC machines and it's flickering every time the wind's blowing, that business is not going to want to be here.
No, but I don't think John Deere does too bad with Mid-American. And I know for a fact that we don't lose power from Mid-American. You want to throw John Deere out there? Let's throw it out there because I know.
Let's
that
look
we don't
at
lose it.
reliability indices. We're 10 times better than Mid-American, and that's a fact.
10%, 2.00, I mean, what is your reliability? 0.002% outage as opposed to 0.003% outage or 10% outage? I don't see people in Janesville suffering because they have, the power's out constantly. If that's all you've got is reliability, throw something out here like, our power smells better or something, but don't throw reliability out there because I don't see that it's that much different.
But in Janesville, for example, they have to pay several $1,000s if they're building a new home to connect.
I'd take that over paying 17 cents a kilowatt hour over the life of that home. I'll be happy to pay for my own connection.
I don't know where you get 17 cents per kilowatt hour average.
I'm talking about,
It's not
I
in
just said
Waverly.
independent. No, it's not in Waverly. It's 13.6.
So, in
by your
2012, Mid-American had 1.23 interruptions for every single customer on their system. That's 750,000 interruptions. Waverly had 0.13 interruptions for 4,800 customers. I think that's a significant difference. In 2012, it took Mid-American 216 minutes to reply to an outage. In Waverly, to get the interruption fixed. In Waverly, it was 5.73 minutes.
And if that's all you've got, Darryl,
So in
that's fine.
2012, what it takes for average duration of outage, so a full-blown outage, 43 minutes in Waverly, 175 minutes on Mid-American.
Are we talking
those
about-
are statistics that don't lie. I mean, if you want to put your business in a place where reliability doesn't matter, then have at it.
Are we talking about rates or are we talking about reliability? Because, again, another common denominator on the Harlan and Independence are that, they both have a communication utility that is.
Well, I think
that
your
is
reference to
generally-
Harlan Independence is a personal attack at me. Has
I'm
nothing
just
to do
saying-
with Waverly's rates. So I really am offended that you would pull those out.
I'm just trying to
But
compare.
can you tell me what's behind their rates? What's driving their rates?
Oh, you tell me. You're the
You
one.
tell me. You looked up the research.
I'm just looking at rates.
You said you talked to them.
So
I
What are
think
you
that
propo-
we want to
proposing
set the
then?
tone here in a way that.
another thing that
Just a minute.
Dan, what was that website that you had?
it is electricitylocal.com.
Electricity local.
Right. And you're talking about reducing demand also. What's our rebate structure look like? In comparison to other companies. You want to compare us to, Mid-American and that. What's our rebate? Our rebates are very minimal compared to what we get, through a Mid-American or through Alliant. I personally, I was just pricing out an AC system, and you're not with the rebate that you have for a 15 SEER or greater is $100. What is the difference between a 13 SEER and a 15 SEER unit? And you get to that, and the extra $100 just doesn't. You're not encouraging that behavior with the rebate. You're not, for the people that can't afford, that are living in a home where they cannot afford to pay the utility rates to begin with, and then they want to upgrade, and you're only offering them $100 to make that extra step to a more efficient unit, and you're giving them $100, they can't justify that.
I can't answer that. If
Well,
they
you know
can
what-
justify
you know
it
what
or
your
not, I can't
rebates are.
answer that. Whether a homeowner can justify it or not is not for me to decide.
It's easy for me to decide. I made that decision. Do I go with a higher energy efficient unit, pay an extra, $600-700 for that unit, and I get another $100 back? It's a business decision.
Dan, why don't you see if we can, rather than just keep going, and hit the high points and we can move on.
Another contributor, I think, to our rates are $40 million debt service that we have to mean. Is that not a fair statement?
We have no bond debt service to mean. We have an obligation to help
We have
them
an
cover their bonds, yes.
Correct. So through the mean organization, we have a tremendous amount of debt service that we need to pay. So much to the point that we really are tied to mean, and we cannot remove ourselves from that organization. Is that correct?
That's my understanding, yes. Until the bonds are covered, that's correct.
Okay.
What other
And that's going to be
options are
40
there?
years from now.
I believe it's 2041.
Correct.
I wouldn't be 40 years, but it'd be close.
What other options are there? I mean, this has been brought up before that we shouldn't belong to that organization. What other organizations is there for us to belong to?
Well, we signed it.
On our own on open market and try to
Yeah,
purchase
there's been an
power.
agreement signed with Mean that we would back the bonds that they took out on our behalf. So we have an obligation to them through 2041. So it's 2017, so we're talking, what is that, 23 years?
Again, my question is
24
more
years.
if we hadn't chose to go with them, we would have had to chose to go with someone else that would have put us in the same financial situation to be part of. I guess I'm struggling with, show me a better choice that should have been made back when we made this choice. And
Yeah, and hindsight's a great indicator of what perhaps you should have done. But in 2008, we didn't know the recession was coming. I think the agreement, we actually physically joined in 2010, but the agreements were done before the recession started. So in 2007, they're predicting a shortage of energy because the United States was using 2% more every year. Recession hit, that reversed. Now it's flat and actually declining every year. So by joining, we have an obligation to them. They had gone out and purchased additional means to reach that or to serve that increasing load. And then that load went away and actually started reducing. So yes, Mean has some hurdles to get over. I talked about them, replacing higher cost contracts they bought before the recession. So that will help us stabilize and bring those mean costs down. But as far as getting out of Mean, I don't believe that's possible before 2041.
Carl, I'm getting a message from Dave. He can't be heard on here, and he had some input.
Where would you get the message?
He has a different number that he could call.
Oh, yeah. That pleases the mayor, I guess. Is that all right with you?
I suppose. Go ahead.
Just struggling with where this conversation is going, I guess.
Yeah,
To me, this conversation
I think
would fit better with the
231.
utility board and then the council, because I don't know what we're supposed to do with the conversation.
2813.
That, and I think the tone here is a little bit,
Well, I'm sorry that the tone
strained,
isn't celebratory over Waverly Light and Power. I think there's a lot of concern here in our community where we have people that I have had phone calls that people are leaving town because of utility rates. They're selling their home,
Okay,
they're
just one
leaving
moment.
town
because of the utility rate.
because of utility rates.
We checked this out, and I don't know.
We gained
That
78
isn't
new
been true.
customers last year and 48 new customers so far this year, so I'd have to disagree with that statement, that things are not negative in Waverly, but Waverly is growing. So you can look at an apple from either side, Dan, so I guess I'm looking at the other side.
Where I'm struggling with tone a little bit is that we've done so well in terms of efficiency with the administration of the utility, dealing with apples and apples. You get to Cedar Falls and they have Martin Brothers, they have Target distribution centers, they pay a huge money. You get to Waterloo and you got John Deere and you have all these people paying in. They have, every community is different. We have locally owned, we have all these employees paying in, we have all these advantages coming in. I think, Dan, we have to balance this before we get in a tone that isn't affirmative. I could see something friendly being said, but I don't understand the tone when we have all these wonderful advantages and have a home-owned utility.
Hey, can you hear me on the phone now?
Yes.
Yes, David.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Hey, Ed, if you can hear me, I've been trying to hear, and our technology doesn't seem to be very good. Hopefully, we can try to improve that going forward. But just a couple of comments that I would make is, as we compare rates, I think it's Mid-America Energy leadership deserves the opportunity to come to a city council meeting and defend the statements that were made tonight, that their rates are low at the expense of taxpayers. I don't know all the details, but I would question those statements, and I think it's a good opportunity to have them come and defend themselves, and then talk about a cost of serve study that they can provide and compare. But also, I think as we're talking about compares apples to apples, blue and other. If you look across the state, if you look at Denver, Iowa, their rates are significantly less than us. There's many communities. The challenge that we've got is our inverted tier structure. So if you're using 600 kilowatts, we're right in the middle. But if you 1,500 kilowatt hours a month or more, it's significantly higher, to the point where in the financials for Waverly Light and Power, they said the average residential rate is 14 cents a kilowatt hour. So if we're in the middle, I guess I challenge the group tonight. Tell me one town, one consumer that actually is paying more than 14 cents a kilowatt hour. In the summer, we talked about the average rate is 15 cents a kilowatt hour. Find one customer that pays more than that. And I guess I don't. This discussion isn't negative. It's just kind of challenging, the sustainability and the ongoing sustainability of Waverly. Many citizens tell me, boy, I got that utility bill. Can you help me? How do we get that down? So this isn't a negative discussion. It's just talking about the business of running the town. So I think that's what we're trying to articulate. That's what Dan was doing a good job of talking about. and I don't want this to go or be discussed as being negative, but I've really lost patience with the discussion of rates being in the middle, because I live in all the research I found, and I've got every mean customer, I've got every community municipality in Iowa, all of those, and we're not in the middle. So I'm really struggling with that, and I think we need to take some time and walk through that and kind of come to an agreement where we stand and how we can I guess communicate what our rates are. Obviously, we're not going to be the lowest, and we probably don't want to be the lowest, but there's value to the rates that we provide and the service that we provide. I think we need to do a better job of articulating that.
David, did you follow
saying
the...
that we're in the middle?
David, can you hear me?
It's just frustrating because it's not true.
You can't hear me.
I guess from my standpoint, I would challenge, we're hearing what Daryl's saying and what they've provided for it, and we hear people challenging them, but we're not hearing what is the alternative and what are the associated costs.
And I think that's
that
our challenge is we've kind of significantly, we talk about local control from my standpoint, we have zero local control because of how the assets have been commingled with mean. So today, if something happens to mean, or something, if we don't like the rates, we're really...
So what is the alternative?
With rates now, if you compare to, and I don't want to compare others, but if you compare Mid-America Energy, they're talking about the reduction in utilization of coal or dependence upon coal because of the wind energy. So they're talking about rates not changing until a significant time in the future, where we're kind of always talking about how our rates are going up and how we can't control them.
And Mid-America is getting $2.5 billion in rebates from the federal government. To the point of $40 million
that it would take to buy ourselves out of being, to actually have local control, that concerns me.
Yeah, the alternative would be to pay off our debt, continue to pay off our debt responsibilities to the mean organization, and manage our own rate structure, or have someone else come in and do it.
And where do we get that energy from?
Well, you would have to, like I said,
we'd have to build a coal plant, so we would have to invest
in
that.
I think we'd have to part of a coal plant, but
involve ourselves with going to a private company that's a for-profit versus Waverly Utilities, which is a not-for-profit.
Which would provide lower rates, yes. But again, paying off, the caveat here is you have to pay off the $40 million of debt that we're already got responsible for. So it doesn't make it, there is no financial solution here. We are so tied to mean, we are so bound up in that contract that there is no solution. We're pretty much stuck till 2041.
So then why are we talking about it?
Just accept it, I guess. We'll continue, if mean decides to raise the rates, that's fine. That's...
Well, I too would like to hear another, I'm following you, but we are where we are, so where do we go from here?
I think we need to look at, more, you've done a great job from your presentation, but there are ways that we can cut costs more. Let's make it great rather than just be happy with average.
We're not talking about...
Above average.
Yeah, I think we're really above average. When we're talking average, we're not talking about average service. We're talking about phenomenal service, phenomenal reliability, a home-owned utility. We're talking about 22nd from the bottom or the lowest in utilities.
Out of 180 some or 90.
And from the data that I've got, that's not true. And I'm frustrated with hearing this. From the data that I've got, and the data provided by Mean, and the data provided by Mid-America Energy and other utilities, that's not true. So I think we need to get together and understand the facts. As we're saying, we're in the middle. Tell me one customer, one utility that's got higher than 14 cents per kilowatt hour. So, and as we know, I've got the utility usage of every customer in Waverly, and can do some, basically some analysis, and it's a very high percentage. The average might be a certain place at 14 cents per kilowatt hour, but if you look at the tail of the people that are actually paying significantly more, there's a significant percentage of the citizens of Waverly that are paying 15, 16, 17 cents a kilowatt hour, where
So to get to
if you
that
go to other
average, there has
communities,
to
they
be a
don't have
certain
tiered
percentage
rate,
of the
so they're not
community that is
paying
paying
more than 11
below
cents a
that.
kilowatt hour, 8
That's
cents
how an
per
average comes
CFU,
about.
or whoever that might be.
I think during the 4 summer months where we get 18
Because-
cents over 1,100, so for 4 months, if you go above 1,100, depends on how far above 1,100 kilowatt hours you go. But the other 8 months of the year, we're at 12.7 cents.
We get to
So-
an average because there are people
it-
that are
but
above
Kurt,
it,
that's
and
not
there are
true.
Correct, those
people
other
below it.
8
There's-
months,
Financials
everybody
working
pays the
with
same for all kilowatt hours, so
residential customer.
I think the
So to say it's
statement that
12 kilowatt hour
the
is not
18
true.
cents goes
It's in
throughout the
your-
years is false.
It's in your report.
I never said that it was 18 cents throughout the year. What we said was
Well, I think
average.
David just said that. He said it's 18 cents and higher, but it's
say
only
18
4
cents.
months out of the year. So, yes, and like I said, that rate was designed to encourage consumers to not use so much energy during the summer months because it's very expensive. So it was set up that way intentionally. Could we flatten the rate out? Absolutely. And those people that don't use it very much, they would see a 4 or 5 cent increase. And those that use a ton at 18 cents, they would see a tremendous decrease during those 4 months. Is that fair? Probably not.
But you're claiming that you're
I-
tied for
I'm-
22nd lowest. You're 22nd lowest
correct.
based on a cents per kilowatt hour at 9.4.
If
The
you look at the
residential
chart,
customer
Colander
will
is at
never-
16.5 cents. They're the highest end. It's on the right side. It's in the packet material. And you can see that's the average kilowatt hour across the entire utility. That little utility doesn't have commercial or resident or commercial or industrial. All they have is a residential rate. Their residential rate is 16.5 cents. So there's one. Work your way backwards on the chart. And you'll see how many people have higher rates than Waverly Utilities.
And
but
just,
you're
I want to
claiming-
intercept here a little bit. Dan, I'm going to intercept here a little bit. I think that there is a chance to, if Dan or Dave or anybody wants to call Daryl tomorrow and go through that, I'm sure you'd be open to that.
But I think
I don't
we need
see
to
the back and
discuss
forth
this.
So,
advantage
Chuck,
here.
I have
You're
had
challenging the
citizens come to me and
figures.
tell me they wanted to
We
go to a
just
board
kind
meeting,
of no,
and they were
David.
not allowed to
I don't
speak.
want this back and forth anymore. I think you made
I know
a
you wanna
point.
censor us. I know
I
that's-
said you.
that's how you
I don't
roll,
want
but
any more
you're
back and
trying to tell
forth,
the
David.
truth.
So, Dan, I'd like you to give the last statement of wrap up for your point of view.
Again, you're 22nd lowest in the state based on a 9.4 cent average. That's total commercial, industrial, and residential, correct?
That's correct.
Most of your usage is going to be in commercial and industrial, so that's going to skew your average down. Correct?
That's correct. That's why we said the residential was 13.6 average
But
across
your
12
average-
months.
your average
It's
residence is going to
15.1 cents
pay-
for the 4 months, as we demonstrated earlier.
But not back and forth, Dan. Just make your points.
But your residential customer pays an average of 13.6 cents for the whole year.
I'd like to suggest something. Daryl presented some data here. He did a slide presentation. We know what that says. You and Dave are reading from notes, and apparently you have all this other research you've done. Would you prepare that in a way that we could all look at it, and then we could have a better discussion about it, I think. Then we can compare the two.
I definitely agree. I think that's kind of what I was after. Is my fear is that we're kind of avoiding the elephant in the room. That we've got citizens that, or quite frankly, I've heard of an elderly lady that had not turned her lights on at night because she can't afford the electricity. I've got families of 5 kids in older homes that have $500 utility bills that can't afford it. So what I've done is actually gone out and actually got actual data, and it's not jiving with what I'm hearing tonight. So that frustrates me. That's exactly what I'd like to do, Edie, is come together. But I know citizens have tried to do that without good result.
Well, if you would just pull together an
Discussions to
executive
start
summary
working
of all
toward,
your research, that would
solutions.
be great. That would give us something to talk about, because what I'm hearing is not what you're hearing from citizens, and so let's see what you have. We should talk about it, but we have to have something concrete to look at. I don't think you can expect us tonight, just by reading off of your notes, to keep going on and on about this. So that would be my suggestion.
Thank you, councilpersons, because I think we need to move on, and we need to thank Daryl for his presentation. And I think that it was very helpful, and I think we all learned from that. And David, I'm talking. So I think, again, very, very helpful, but we would look forward to any other summary statements that the David and Dan would bring. Any last comments?
Yeah, and just kind of to Edie's point, where, you know, I saw this on the agenda. So during budget time, I mean, we've got significant data from experts. You know, we had a board member from Independence Light and Power reach out to us with concern of watching kind of what was going on. So we've done a significant amount of research. The problem is when you see this pop up on the agenda, like, oh, we don't have time to prepare and pull all that stuff back up. So what we're trying to, so this is an ongoing challenge, ongoing work that we've done, and we need to come to resolution. And I guess I don't want to see presentations that say we're in the middle, because that just disguises the truth. What I'd like to do is actually spend a significant amount of time and look for solutions together.
Yeah, as we've agreed, put those fingers together, and you can come back.
If I might, Mr. Mayor, thank you. Thank you for allowing me to come and present the facts that we have. I want to extend an offer to any council member at any time to come to our board meeting with facts, figures, questions, as we've thrown out many, many times. But I'm sorry to say that over the last couple of years, there's been no council members that have bothered to show up with their facts to point anything out to the Board of Trustees. So I will throw that out. Thank you for allowing me to be here. I appreciate it.
Come forward to those meetings, and they're told they can't speak.
He's giving a closing statement. Again, thank you for your presentation. We have two reports of commission minutes. We have historic preservation from August 28th, 2017. Any comments? Officially received. We have Economic Development Commission minutes from September 12th. Any comments? Officially received. Staff comments?
I don't think we have any tonight, sir. Thank you.
Okay. Council comments? Edie, Dan?
I do have a comment. Dan can go first if he's got it. I'd like to take just a minute to go on record regarding a comment in the October 17th Waverly paper where I'm named explicitly by a fellow council member. To quote Wes Gade, "This was the first time Edith Waldstein didn't get the vote she wanted on council, so she told our mayor to do what she wanted." He was referring to the mayor's veto of the most recent resolution on the pedestrian bridge. Honesty is one of the personal characteristics that I hold most high. Honesty is critical to our functioning here as a city council. And I'm here to tell you that this claim of Wes's is false. The resolution to which he is referring is not the first time I was in the minority when voting on council. And to this day, I have not discussed the pedestrian bridge option with the mayor. I have, though, honestly expressed my views as part of our city council deliberation in public. There are some things Waverly citizens should be very concerned about, as Wes says at the end of his comments in the paper. In my opinion, fabricating ideas out of thin air and promoting them as the truth is something Waverly citizens should be very concerned about. Waverly citizens deserve honesty, and therefore I'm correcting this record.
Thank you, Edie. Dan? Kim?
I don't often like to get political. It's one of the things I actually have kind of enjoyed about this job is it really isn't supposed to be, political in terms of partisan type of political. But we do have an election coming up, and we do have certainly 3 new council members for sure are going to be on. And I'm in a race as well as the only sitting councilman running for re-election. But regardless of how that works out, I think one of the first actions that the new council needs to take is to discuss decorum and a proper way to treat and deal with citizens, commissions, boards, utilities, et cetera, that come before the council. It seems far too often that they have been attacked and badgered, and if anything is giving the city a kind of a black eye, it's the treatment that the council uses its position in terms of treating people that come before it.
Thank you, Tim. Dan?
I don't think I could add anything to what's been said tonight.
Dietrich?
Good, thanks.
We thank everyone for a long night and a lot of information, and I'd ask for adjournment.
Move we adjourn?
Second, please. All in favor, yes?
Yes.
Adjourn.